Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I am so delighted to be here today with author Katherine Forbes Riley. Welcome.
Hello. Great to be here.
Oh, it's truly my pleasure. So, Katherine Forbes Riley is an award winning writer and computational linguist living in Vermont. Her debut novel, The Bobcat, was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize. Catherine's creative writing also appears in the Wingleaf 2018 Top 50 list, as well as numerous other literary journals. So, such an accomplished writer. I'm so delighted to talk with you today. And I'd love to just kind of hop right in with the Bobcat. Your book opens with a really lovely opening paragraph. Would you mind reading the opening paragraph of the Bobcat for us?
Sure, love to. I've actually found that as part of this process, one of the things I really love to do is read aloud. I do it to my children, but I never had to do my own work before, and it's fun. It's got you get into it.
Yeah, you kind of hear it differently when it's coming
Yeah,
out with your own words and your own
yeah.
voice. Like,
I think that
yeah.
Charles Dickens always did that, and I
Hmm.
never really understood it till now. So yeah, but how it sort of helps you make it better. Yeah.
Sure, sure.
Okay, so let me give it a try. Chapter 1. Physically, the fog signaled only the tail end of a long Vermont winter, but nature assumed a kind of sentience, given space. So it pillowed against Laurelie's windows as a soft asylum wall and leaked its internal fluids on the sills and acted as a deranged refractor on the view, magnifying the crags and pores down her cottage's stone walls into dizzying cliffs, while drowning the yard and forest beyond in uniform gray particulate. Okay.
So beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for reading your own work out loud. And I particularly love that line, like, nature assumed its own sentience given the space. And so, you do such a fantastic job in the Bobcat of setting the mood. And certainly we feel that even just from the moment you start with that first paragraph. So tell me a little bit more. Where do we go from there? Tell me more about the Bobcat.
I think that's a major theme of the novel is how the world, outside world, sort of takes on a manifestation of our internal state, and in this novel, it's nature and uh, and art and these things that um, sort of connect us to the outside world, manifest our inner demons or pleasures on it. And in this case, so the Bobcat is a love story. I think first and foremost, it's a love story, but it's also a story about the universality of trauma. The main character, Laurelie, has during her freshman spring at a large Philadelphia university, was given a drugged beer at a fraternity party and then raped. Um, and so when the Bobcat begins, it's 3 years later, and she's sort of been paralyzed for 3 years, and has finally escaped it. And she transferred from Philly to a tiny rural college in rural Vermont, and there begins a process of recovery. But just because she's run from the trauma, it's still living inside her, and so it's manifesting itself on nature. She's feeling a soft asylum wall at the start, feeling the fog like that. And she's sort of avoiding people and is very reclusive and locked up. And so the journey of the novel is a process of reconnecting through love, but also through art and nature. And so what's interesting to me is that a lot of the people who's most strongly connected with this novel have had some kind of trauma themselves. And it's usually not rape. It's usually divorce or death in the family or illness, some other illness, anything that's made them feel vulnerable. They sort of recognize in Laurelie's outer manifestation of vulnerability, they recognize something of themselves. And I think that's great. It makes me really happy. And so it's a book sort of about recovery, but it's also about we don't just come back and survive, but we sort of get stronger. Something that the old cliche, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think that applies here as well. She comes out of this, in an MFA program, making art that feels really good to her. At the start, it's like sort of just reflecting her inner demons, but at the end, she's making this art that people really admire, her advisors admire and stuff. So I like stories with happy endings. I've always, like Casablanca when I was younger, I just hated that story. It was such a beautiful love story, but they couldn't be together, And so,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
don't, I sort of like positive endings. But there are four main characters in this novel, and they've all sort of been traumatized in some way. The boy could be argued, the little boy she babysits could be argued to have a speech deficit of some kind, and so she's working through him with that. At the same time, she's working through the aftermath of her rape, and the hiker has his own trauma, which, I'm not sure how much to reveal. And the Bobcat too has been, shot, and she's pregnant. So they're all sort of simultaneously, healing in the woods together, kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So certainly like a really compelling, really rich story, right? That you have Laurelie who is working through her trauma, that she stumbles upon, this, right, like you said, this wounded bobcat, and the hiker who's trailing this wounded bobcat. So you get those layers of vulnerability there as well. And yes, and then the 2.5-year-old that she babysits and is working through, like, there's a lot of vulnerability with the really small children. So I think that, like, that's absolutely a kind of a theme that pervades the book. And there's also, like, the book has these beautiful layers of refraction. I found, like, both the, like, being observed and observing. Laurelie is an artist, so, like, the artist and her craft, and so, like, seeing the world with that artistic view, and also, like you said, kind of these layers of trauma and its aftermath and its healing. Can you talk to me a little bit more about working with all of those different layers and how you maybe played with them in the writing of the book?
Yeah, well, it took 6 years, and it really is. It's like a layering, a weaving. I think of it a lot like weaving. Like you start with just a weft. It started out. It was just going to be, frankly, a tawdry love story. I wanted to write a cheap romance. I'm a linguist by trade. I've done scientific research on language, but a very scholarly approach for 10 years before this novel. And then I had my first child, and I just needed to. My husband's an artist. He's a visual artist. And, we've been together since I was 21. So I've sort of grown up with him. It's steeped in his language of art. He'd show me Cézannes, and I'll say, you see how it's the line and the, so I can't really speak it, but I can understand it. And, and when I had my child, I wanted to, I just couldn't, I needed to get, I had a difficult childhood. And I never thought I'd have a kid. But, love, it changes you, and I sort of got away from home and got away from that and had a child. And then I needed to sort of get that out of me in a way, kind of like a memoir people do, but this is not autofiction. It's not a memoir, but there's definitely a personal, to me, it's all allegory of my life, like secret allegory,
Sure.
all writers, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, super interesting. And you mentioned too that you have work as a computational linguist and have worked as a linguist. Can you both tell me what that means to be a computational linguist, and how does your work as a linguist impact your work as a novelist?
So we linguists study language. They don't create. It's never creative. It's you study it. You observe how it's used, and you figure out. So there's sounds pouring out of our mouth. And somehow we organize them into units and chunk them, and they convey our thoughts to each other. And it's pretty magical. And so as a linguist, you study that magic, and you try to write rules to figure out how it works across languages. People speak with clicks and tones in other languages. It's really fascinating, all the different ways it can work. I studied sort of larger units, so discourse. So how we'll be talking about one thing, say the weather, and then we'll move into another topic, but then we'll refer back to the weather, and like when is that allowed? When does it feel like, oh, jarring, and when does it feel good? So I was always sort of interested in the stories, the bigger units of conveying information. And then when I had my child, it was just like, suddenly I felt confident or free or powerful enough to like try to use it, try to do it, try to make it, as opposed to just study it. I think I think it was kind of a stricture on me. I had as I said, given my childhood, I sort of was very drawn towards the rules of academia for a long time. There was always a right answer. You had people patting you on the head, and complimenting you and stuff. And then, I kind of felt freer to go wild after I became a mother. It's kind of funny.
Well, indeed. Well, there is actually sort of a freedom too, right? Like, so I have not had children, but I have a niece who just turned 2, and there is something about like this new life and all of the potential. I mean, like it does feel like infants are really like potential embodied, right? And so
Yeah.
to be part of that and to know that you can kind of be helping the shaping of them as they move through the world is a like incredibly magical process. And you've also used the word magic already in our conversation, and so also this magic of language, right? So I absolutely can see that combination and that playing together of becoming a mother alongside your work as a linguist. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And how was that to watch your child learn how to talk? Like, did that also kind of play in as you're working on the novel?
Yeah, all his speech, Rowan in the book, the boy, his speech is directly, I just wrote it down when my son said it and directly inserted it. you know. The boy in the book, he has a speech delay, arguably. So his is actually occurring later than my son slightly. But my son was, and myself as well, I was told I like didn't talk. And then suddenly at 2, I spoke in full sentences. And my son was
Amazing.
that too. And the whole range of speech for children is so wide that there's really no law to it.
Yeah. Oh, so interesting. And probably so interesting too to see some of your research in play, like, kind of with your son. Like, that's fantastic.
And also in the novel, like when you write as a linguist, when you write, you're aware of the rules, but you're also aware I'm breaking them and it's still working. Like how is that? It's funny to see a science in action.
Yep,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah. And so I read also that you finished the Bobcat while you were in Rome in Italy. And so I wanted to just check in and find out if there was something about traveling internationally that like helped give you distance and help you to finish the novel. And are there pieces of Italy that made its way into the Bobcat?
right. My husband got a Rome Prize, which is a pretty prestigious prize in art, and so he up and took our whole family over there, which was kind of dramatic in a way. it's a gorgeous place, but they really focus on their scholar, the people they brought over. The families are kind of a little bit like try not to show up too much. So yeah, so it was a wildness, depositing my children and I alone in this place for a certain amount of time. And yeah, you get confident. It was another language, so I worked really hard to learn Italian. Before I left, I can speak some French and Spanish, and Italian is related. So I was able to pick up enough. But I went over and I found myself sort of mute. I could hear and understand quite a bit, but that speaking is a whole nother. So there's 2 areas of the brain. One controls understanding, one controls speech, and somehow I didn't practice speech enough. So. But I think that just survival over anywhere abroad with children, gives you a confidence and also a huge distance. Like I put the Bobcat down for 3 or 4 months. I did that through it took 6 years to write, and I would work on it and I couldn't figure stuff out. So I put it away and I'd write short stories, and then you come back and you have distance, and that's crucial. I was just reading a fellow debuter, Karen Dukess, who wrote The Last Book Party, which is great. I'd like to recommend that. She just posted on Twitter an interview with Andre, I don't know how to pronounce it, Dubus the third. He wrote House of Sand and Fog some years ago. And she posted this interview we did about writing. We're all trying to write our second novels now, and we're seeking inspiration anywhere because it's no easier. And he said to put it down for 2 seasons, which is too long when you're under a deadline, frankly. But something like traveling to Rome or abroad really does it's like an infusion of quicker distance, a month or 2 months or 3 months away. And suddenly you see this thing like you are a stranger, And
Yeah.
so I agree. I really think you're right that enabled me to cut away the last of the extraneous detail and submit it. But also my agent, I think, really likes languages. And so I was able to say, I got to go on a visiting artist visa. So I was able to put that in the query letter, and so, and then I was in Rome, and she speaks some Italian, I think. So it's all these like tumbling of coincidences and lucky accidents that I think let the Bobcat be published.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Well, I am so glad that like Rome and that international travel gave you the distance you needed to complete the Bobcat, that it helped get it into the world by connecting you with your agent. That's really fantastic. And you mentioned a book recommendation with the last book party. And I read on another interview that you gave that you consider yourself a quote book devourer. And so you are in great company with Must Read Fiction. We are also a whole bunch of book devourers. What books have you devoured lately? And are there any books, maybe that aren't quite as recent, but that you just wish that everyone would read? Like books that you would just give to anyone. We would just love to hear some book recommendations.
Yeah, well, first and foremost would be The Friend, in recent memory by Sigrid Nunez. I really find as I age, I like to hear smart older women talk to me. It's different than smart older men or passionate younger women or passionate younger men. And I find it's actually a little harder to read younger writers for me, from where I am, this is so natural that I think there's so many books and so many people with great voices that you just at different stages drawn to the ones that speak to you. And then they speak to you differently. Like a book that I keep coming back to is Anna Karenina. And I know that the old white men are out of fashion. And I agree that their voices have been too much solely heard. But that man's voice in that book, I am Anna Karenina. I am her, and there's nothing I can do about that. Just and then Trust Exercise I read recently. The first section of that, there's 3, one big one, and then I think another slightly shorter, and then another something like that. And the first one just blew my mind. I loved it. The second and third I didn't like as much, but it didn't matter. Like the first one, just a masterpiece, I thought.
Yep. Yeah, that one's really interesting too, because it's like, yes, you do get sucked into those, like that first part, those 130 pages. And then she just starts to kind of mess with you. And so I felt like what was interesting about those other 2 portions was almost the discomfort of it, which of course played into the title, Trust Exercise, like almost you as a reader, do you trust me as a writer? Do you trust yourself? And so I think there was some really interesting nuance at play there too, which was a lot of fun.
Yes. And then Malloy by Beckett is another one like Anna Karenina that when I need just another thing I read recently in trying to write my second one is in the morning, you should just, before you sit down or whenever it is before you sit down, you should just read somebody else's something, and if I just open Malloy anywhere and read a few of his strange, I'm suddenly in the writing head, in a way that, doing my dishes, I'm not so necessarily. So, so The Friend and Trust Exercise. And then Sabrina and Karina is another one. It's a bunch of short stories, and they're really good. I've actually only yet read the ones on her website. I'm going to maul her last name, so I'm not even going to attempt it. Her first name is Callie, F-A. But the book is Sabrina and Karina. It's a bunch of short stories, and it's shortlisted for the National Book Award this year. And boy, they're powerful stories. So I really recommend those. And a bunch more on her website. Like
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So we've got our reading list that we can literally just like go to straight from here. So, fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for those book recommendations. We've definitely now got a list, which is so great. And thank you so very much for writing the Bobcat. It's must readers. Please do check it out. It's a fantastic novel. And Katherine Forbes Riley, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin.